This is our very first Casting Seeds podcast recording video where I get to have my very first interview with Dr. Gator. I cannot wait for you guys to hear this interview. I love his wisdom and his discernment as an MD. And let me just say, when I say the theme of casting seeds, he is the epitome of that. Thank you so much for watching, and God bless. All right, welcome back everyone to Casting Seeds. I'm Savannah, your host, and you're listening to the only holistic health podcast that uses God's singular truth to give you individualized discernment. Today's episode, I am so excited. I could not gush enough about how much I love Dr. Joel Warsh. He's a pediatric MD, author of his new book, which is ready for pre-order, called Parenting at Your Child's Pace, the interactive pediatrician's guide to the first 3 years of life. He's also somehow has the time to be a business owner of Tiny Roots Apothecary, along with being the CMO of Kiki Milk Company, which I can't wait to figure out more about those later. But I just want to welcome you to the podcast episode, Dr. Warsh, or Dr. Gator, right? As they call you on Instagram.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I get asked about Gator a lot. My wife's last name's Intelligator, so that's how it started. It's like, haha, Dr. Gator. It's not a Florida thing. Nothing against Florida. I grew up in Toronto, but it's not a Florida thing. It's a wife thing.
That's so cute. I love that your family is involved in everything that you do, including your practice. Which, speaking of your wife, congratulations on your recent life. Your new baby that you just had. Has that been okay? Have you guys been doing okay?
Yeah, it's been pretty good. I mean, I would say, I guess, pretty lucky. He's pretty good sleeper, pretty chill baby. So we'll take it. We can't send him back at this point. So, that's it.
Do you feel like all of your kids have been easier because you know how to interact with them even at a young age?
I don't know. I mean, they've both been very good, so I don't know if it has anything to do with me or we're just lucky, but we can take some credit and some luck. I don't know. Well, somewhere in the middle.
Good mix in between. Well, because I found you on Instagram and I love the way that you gently I say gently because I feel like some people have to get perturbed sometimes in the way that you call them out. But I love that. That's actually one of the reasons why I followed you. And then when I saw that you were writing a book, I immediately was like, I have to go in and get a pre-order. But I wanted to ask you, with your book and kind of the climate that goes into far extremes with healthcare online, do you feel like it can get kind of nerve-wracking being honest in what you think is best in healthcare for kids and for parents and how they're leading their kids?
Yeah, so I mean, just like you said, the landscape around health and wellness and medicine these days is pretty frustrating. It can be very divisive, though I don't know why it has to be. Everyone's on the same team. We're all here to help our kids be more resilient and healthy, and we don't always necessarily agree on the best way to do that, but there are a lot of reasonable options for most things. There are very few topics in health where there's just like one way to do it. That's the absolute right way. That's the right way for everybody to do it. That's almost never the case. There's always a lot of factors that go into any decision for any family. And I found more and more that there is this division and this frustration for parents and with everything, like every parenting decision. And that's really one of the bigger reasons why I even wanted to write the book in the first place. I mean, one, there's just more stress than ever. So I wanted to help de-stress parents. And I really wanted to talk about the range of what's possible for most of these common questions that parents have and that I get every day. Because I do find that it's like very scary for a lot of parents these days. It's like, you got to do it this way. This is the only way to do feeding, or this is the only way to do sleep, and you should sleep train, or you shouldn't sleep train. You start with this food or don't start with this food. And most of the time it doesn't really matter. There's a lot of different ways to do things, and you can take that information in and then pick what's best for you and your family. And so that's what I try to do, using evidence and some humor and kind of discuss things. So yeah, I think it's frustrating where we are, but it doesn't have to be as stressful.
Do you feel like you're an advocate then, kind of on the forefront of getting people to understand that there is no one way answer when it comes to healthcare?
I try to be. There's no training in medicine for social media or any of this stuff. It's just something that has come, over time. And I was never really involved in it until more recently. But I think that the pace to which let's say, Instagram has grown, I think speaks to what people are interested in terms of that there is certainly an interest in holistic parenting and discussions and honesty. I just try to be honest. I don't try to be extraordinarily controversial. I think some things are controversial just because you are even willing to talk about them, even though it really shouldn't be, but I try to at least ask questions and then let people have discussions and open it up. I don't know why people get so angry about so much stuff. It can, it gets controversial, I guess, but it's not supposed to be.
Yeah. Well, I think people tend to take healthcare because it is a personal and intimate thing, right? So then when it's discussed in such an open playing field, they take it personally when someone says, well, that didn't work for me that way. And it's weird. People tend to get a little self-involved, but I guess that's what social media tends to be about.
It is, and I find that we forget that a lot of the information that we get on childhood topics, especially, it comes from the air quotes gurus on that field. Like if you're talking about potty training or sleep training or whatever it is, you have these individuals who have their method, and then they're trying to sell you something. They're trying to convince you of that thing, and so it's like this is the right way, and then they have all their followers that's the right way, even though there are probably 5 or 10 different ways that could work, and
Mhm.
it's useful to kind of hear about all of them and then decide what makes sense for you. But it becomes stressful when you're hearing, 100,000 people saying like, this is the right way to do it. And if you don't do it, then your kid's going to get X, Y, and Z symptoms and they're never going to Harvard and they're never going to,
Yeah.
like this whole long path that goes through your mind, which
Yeah.
you're like, well, does it really matter which one? Like, I think a great example is starting foods. I think that's a really common thing that I see in the office where it's like baby-led weaning versus purees. And there is a lot of new data coming out about baby-led weaning. If you don't know what baby-led weaning is, it's the starting with more real whole foods and giving them small little bits, and then they're doing that
Mhm.
instead of pureeing it up. But that scares a lot of parents. They're really worried about choking. And they ask me about it. They're like they really want a puree, but then they read about baby-led weaning and everyone says they have to do it that way. So now they're just terrified. And I remind them that if you're going to feed your kid every time and it's going to be extremely terrifying and stressful, then that's much worse overall for the family. That's that stress level. And so maybe that's not the way that you need to do it. You can probably do a mix of both or start with purees and work up to baby led weaning. But also let's
Right.
remember there are kids with no food in the world. So which one of these matter? Like really, which one do you need to be stressed about? It doesn't actually matter that much. So it's just kind of
Yeah.
putting it into perspective for some things like that. Sometimes that really help parents be like, oh, yeah, I guess if I mush up the avocado, it's not the end of the world and they can eat it in a slice in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I've heard that people who worry about baby led weaning, they're worried about like the jaw structure and the teeth structure of growing in for their child. And also just like their natural enzymes and their gums and their mouth being able to help dissolve their food. But for me, my husband and I, we had 4 miscarriages last year. So we decided to take a step back and actually focus on really healing our own bodies first to make sure our babies are at optimal health instead of just trying to use Pitocin and things like that to keep the babies,
Mhm.
which we've even gotten big flack for, which I find really interesting that people get kind of frustrated with me for being okay with allowing my baby to be at the optimal health and making sure my body's at optimal health because I have polycystic ovarian syndrome. So
Mhm.
it's interesting when people give advice, especially medical advice, when you've gotten discernment as a couple, who you are, at the end of the day, and it sounds like you're an advocate for that online as well, that the couple is the first foremost decision maker as a healthcare team. And
Mhm.
everyone else outside of that is giving suggestions. And ultimately, you have to decide to follow them or not follow them. But one of the main things that people ask, because they were so excited that I was interviewing you, was if they're not in, because not everyone who listens is in LA area. And I'm down in Orange County, which is fun because I feel like we're neighbors in a way. But how would they find a healthcare advocate like you when it comes to especially their children? People tend to get really serious about healthcare and being protective of their kids.
Mhm.
How would they find someone that they know is going to be a little more open minded and be okay with looking at things a little more holistically, which is looking at the whole situation, right? It doesn't mean that an MD cannot be a holistic practitioner. And it
Mhm.
doesn't mean that someone who's in holistic health can't be interested in allopathic medicine. So
Sure.
I guess how would you be able to support them in that way of saying, hey, these are some tips on how to find a good overall MD and someone that you trust, whether they're in allopathic medicine or holistic medicine?
Yeah, great question. So I'm going to circle back to that in a second because I want to address what you said
Yeah.
in the first part of that question, which I think was really wise and brilliant. And just I don't want to gloss over it because I think it's really important to talk about, and that the family unit is so important, and it's a team, right? And I think it's really frustrating. And one of the biggest frustrations I feel like in medicine these days is that it seems like healthcare in general is kind of telling people what to do instead of teaching them and having discussions. And medicine, like the word doctor actually comes from the word to teach, docere, it's Latin. And that's what always it was, right? It's not telling people what to do. It's kind of teaching them what to do. It's being part of that team. And usually, if you talk to your doctor, hopefully you like your doctor. And if they give you suggestions, you're going to do it. That's often the way that it is. But it's not about telling people what to do. It's more about giving them the best information and trying to help them make the decision that may be the same thing that the doctor's telling you. It may be something different, but you're not there to tell them what to do. It's more to guide them. And I think that's a very unfortunate path that we moved on in medicine these days. Is kind of much more like, this is the way. If you don't do it my way, then don't come to my office anymore and don't talk to me. And it's like, that's not really the best way to have a medical relationship. So I think that was just kind of an important point that I wanted to not gloss over, but I'll get back to the other question now. So in terms of finding an integrative practitioner, sure, there's a couple of things that go into that. And certainly that goes back to interviewing in the first place. I think that's a big part of making a choice and realizing at first that you have the power as the parent. You're choosing the doctor, and so you don't have to. If you just started with a doctor and you don't really like them or your values don't align, you can always switch. If you haven't chosen a doctor yet, then you can certainly ask to do an interview. Not every office does it, but most do. And so you can pick the best option that there is available for you by asking questions. And in the book, I do talk about the questions on how to choose a pediatrician. But I think the reality is, if there are certain values that are really important to you, like you want someone who's more holistic minded, then don't shy away from asking those questions in an interview. I think that for someone who's holistic minded, they might have questions about vaccines, they might have questions about supplements, they might have questions about a whole host of things, and you can usually get a pretty good sense if you're like, well, we're a more holistic minded family, are you okay with this? Not every doctor is going to know a lot about natural medicine, but some are going to be at least more open to it than others. You can certainly Google integrative doctor, integrative pediatrician, and those do exist, but they may not exist in your area. And then at least maybe you find the most open-minded doctor that there is. Or you can go into parenting groups. There's like naturally minded parenting groups on Facebook and other places. You can say like, hey, I live here. You find one that's in your area. Like, who do you guys go to? Who do you like? And maybe that's a good place to start. Or if it really doesn't exist, if you live in a smaller area, then you can have two practitioners. You can have someone who's there, who's maybe your go-to in case you need an ear check. And then you can either have an online doctor, maybe a naturopathic doctor who you can see for the other stuff. And then you just work in a team.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing too. Because I work on healthcare teams, I'm a huge advocate for that. And I think it can intimidate people, especially financially. And one of the big things that I try to encourage people to understand, because you mentioned earlier that you're right, in some way it has swung where people get afraid to ask doctors questions because they feel like the doctor kind of pressures and says, I am the one and only. This is all of the info that you need. But I do think it always comes back down to, which I don't know if your book is about, but the accountability of the parents and the individuals themselves. And understanding that because you're your own healthcare advocate, it's okay to question those things. It's okay also to not just rely only on insurance and have a savings and actually have some wisdom with you and your partner, whoever that person is, to be able to save up to see the people that you want to be able to provide what's best for you and your family, not what's necessarily easiest. So because we do live in that type of, I feel like, climate with when it comes to social media and getting things really quickly, being able to have Amazon deliver things right away, being able just to go to your local grocery store for everything and anything that you need, that people don't really feel like they have to prepare in any way, shape, or form for their health. And that's why when health happens, people tend to have that shock and not know what to do and just kind of rely on whatever the first person says rather than building a team over time. Have you noticed that as well?
Definitely. So, I mean, people, parents, kids, I mean, I guess maybe this is more even for adults, but you usually don't hear about people accessing integrated medicine until they have a problem. That's when people access it the most, I think, in terms of they've been through the medical system. The medical system doesn't have a good answer for them. They've been sick for a long time, and then they get recommended to go somewhere else, or they're just looking for some solutions. But that's not ideal. I mean, that's why we're in a place where everybody has chronic diseases, and 50% of kids have a chronic disease, and autism rates are skyrocketing, and every chronic condition is skyrocketing. And realistically, we have to get back to a focus on prevention and the foundations of health and trying to prevent those things, and that comes from starting earlier. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. If you're just listening to this now and you're like, oh, I actually would like to think about something more integrative, then you certainly can do that and get a second practitioner now. But yeah, it can be more expensive. I mean, a lot of integrative practitioners don't take insurance because you can't. I mean, there's no model in the current system that works for that realistically. It's unfortunate, but you just can't spend more time or enough time with people and get reimbursed like $10 and then expect that person to stay open very long. So it's just not how it is. And so that's
It's
where
true.
I understand financial barriers for everybody, but that's kind of the choice you make. If it's something that's important to you, then you need to create that budget to go there, and it may just be once a year going to see a natural practitioner. It might be some telemedicine. It just depends, and maybe you can get lucky and you can find somebody that does both.
Yeah.
But it's just not as common.
Well, and that's why I love that you brought it back to, if you start young, then it's easier and to kind of grow with that, which is what your whole book is about. And that's why I wanted to ask you, because I know there's a difference, especially when people come into the office, right? I get this with my clients because as a holistic health practitioner, I cannot see patients. I'm technically not a doctor. I'd love to be able to afford the finances to become a naturopathic doctor, maybe someday. But until then, doing what I do, it's interesting because I've noticed the younger someone is, it's actually easier to talk to them about their healthcare and there's less shame involved.
Mhm.
Where when the older someone is, there tends to be more shame or more guilt, and it's kind of harder to break that barrier. So I'd love to know in your new book that's coming out, what your absolute favorite chapter is. And if it is different, if there's a chapter that you think everyone should read, even if they were to read your book and only read one chapter, what it should be. And if that is your favorite chapter, then it can be both.
Yeah, I think my favorite chapter and the most important chapter is the first, as an introduction. One
Okay.
of the big things that I really wanted to do with this book was to blend holistic health with parenting and try to talk about these things and these concepts before it becomes a problem. Because what you really see these days with parenting books is they're mostly written by therapists. Some of them are by moms, but mostly therapists, and that's great. I mean, there are lots of great books out there, but there's a whole piece of health missing just because they don't have that knowledge base. I mean, a therapist is not a doctor, right? And so they don't have that base foundation and discussions around health, which is so important for everything else. A lot of those books are, more about tantrums and potty training, all which we talk about, but
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about health and foundations first, because the old books, they used to be written by pediatricians, but now the pediatricians kind of write like your health books, like cough, cold, runny nose, is that thing. It's not really a parenting book, but most people read parenting books, especially if they're pregnant. That's usually you're reading, a couple books, and then that's trying to set you up for the things you're going to see. So I wanted something like that, but with that holistic spin and that health spin. And so the first chapter really gets into talking about stress and the stresses of modern parenting and trying to put that in perspective from where we are now to where we are many years ago, and also really talks to the foundations of health. I call it the Dr. Gator smoothie. And that really is, kind of making fun of all the smoothies you see in books. Like, you watch like the daytime TV shows, and the air code guru person comes on and says like, oh, here's my smoothie. It's going to fix everything, yada, yada, whatever. And we all know that that's not true, right? Like there's no smoothie that's going to cure all your diseases. I mean, you can eat healthy and that's great, but there's no such thing. And so the Dr. Gator smoothie is like, it starts with a big scoop of seeds, which is stress, environment, and toxins, exercise, diet, and sleep. And then other things like family, getting out in nature, love, community. Like these are the things that really build health, and discussing those foundations and setting up the rest of the book from there. So I feel like the introduction chapter to me was the most important, just because it's very unique to a parenting book.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it's nice also because you're not questioning the person's background and the information that you're getting, where I feel like a lot of people question the intent of therapists. And a lot of them also recommend drugs in their books as well, which can scare off, I think, a lot of parents from parenting books, or they kind of recommend, or I'm sorry, they do kind of self diagnosis through the books where they say to check for ADHD or ADD or depression in a child. And a parent can, obviously see these things and either do too much of a diagnosis or not diagnose something that could actually be there.
Mhm.
So I love that balance between the two. That's actually why I'm so excited to read your book. And I also want to tell people who are watching this and or listening to this today that it's good to do like preventative work, but preparation work as well. So even though I'm not pregnant, I don't have kids currently right now, that's why I'm excited to learn about these things and to talk to someone like you, so that when I do get pregnant and when we do have a healthy baby, or if we decide to adopt, we're not overwhelmed at the idea of having a child in our life because we've been preparing for it this
Mhm.
whole time. Do you feel like people come in ever too little too late into your office, like you wish you saw them sooner? Or do you feel like it's actually pretty easy at any stage of life to help someone where they're at with their child?
I, I think you can help everybody wherever they're at because that's the relationship that you have as a practitioner. But it's certainly easier, and I mean, I don't know if it's easier, but I think it's better to get ahead of the game and prevent your child from having a disease they didn't need to have, right? Or have discussing lifestyle before so that the thing that happens 10 years from now never happens. But that's not the way that we think, right? I think that's a big part of why I want to write the book, why I talk about the things on social media the way that I do, is because we don't think in that way. And that's why kids are sick all the time. We don't think about every little decision that we make every day in terms of our health. We've
Yeah.
moved to a world where things are more about convenience, and we would want something
Yeah.
that's cheaper and better and faster, which is fine. I mean, there's some good sides of that, but for fast and convenient, you lose something often, which is generally, when you're talking about like food and toxins, it's health. Like we
Yeah.
lose the family time, we lose cooking, we lose the ingredients because you're getting worse ingredients to have preservatives. Like it's good that you can have a meal really quick, but that's not necessarily the best way for your health. And we moved in that direction for a long time, and now we're seeing the results of that, which are quite bad in terms of our life expectancy is going down and chronic disease rates are higher than ever. And so I think we need a course correction back, because medicine in general has gotten quite good at infectious disease. I mean, most people used to die when they were 40, right? So we don't want that either, right? So
Yeah.
we're doing good in some areas, but we're not so great at chronic disease anymore because that hasn't been the focus, and it's a much bigger, much more complex problem. But it starts with the family, it starts with our decisions and the things that we purchase every day and what we're exposed to and what we eat. And those are the things that, it's not actually that complex. It's quite simple, but it involves um uh, paying attention to these things, and it involves making it a priority in your life, and reading a label and thinking about what you're doing. And then with each purchase, it really does add up in the long run, because most of these things that we're seeing now are not, oh, you eat the one piece of cake and that's like the end of the world. No, it's not that. You can eat a piece of cake, it's not the end of the world. If you eat it every day, along with every other chemical and toxin, along with all the other bad food, then over 5 or 10 years, it builds up to a problem.
Yeah. No, and that's true. It's the compiling that happens for health. And that's the thing. People don't realize that it's these things over time. Like I focus a lot on alignment. That's what I specialize in. And I tell them it's your structural alignment, unless you had a significant injury, most of it is what I call a posture injury. It's where the way you've held yourself over time is what pulls you out of alignment. And that takes time to retrain back, either through strength training or through release training, which is what I do through Rolfing. So that totally makes sense because our bodies are made that way structurally and digestively, and with our brain function, it's all the same. I think it just takes an amount of patience that people don't really want to work through normally.
Mhm.
So I love hearing what you had to say on that because I 1,000% agree, which I'm not surprised about. That's why I'm talking to you and interviewing you, because I love all the stuff that you say. My next question is, which kind of, I don't know if you mention it in your book at all, or if you talk about your family and your wife or personal experiences.
Mhm.
But I'd love to know, is there anything that you discovered through your pregnancies and raising your children that was kind of a surprise even for you, where you were like, oh, I can't believe this worked, whether it was through communication or a healthcare need that you felt like your wife needed, whatever you feel like sharing.
Yeah, this isn't in the book, but it's just what comes to mind. I think that I have talked for a long time about how important food is, but I really see it through my kids, how much of a difference it makes. because we eat pretty healthy. And then when they don't eat healthy, like if they're at a party, it's pretty insane the difference in behavior that you see
Really?
and those within, just one meal, not eating the way they eat normally. And that just really makes me think like, okay, this is the way that he's acting today, after eating just that way for that one meal. Or, the other kids that I know I know they're pretty healthy too, some of his friends, and then they, one of them, gets sick the next day and they never get sick. And one of them, it's like you see all these things that happen within a day, and it's like pretty insane to watch that. And then you're like, well, this is just one meal. Like, well, well, no wonder all the kids are sick. No wonder all the kids have mental health issues. No wonder, there's more ADHD and all these things than normal. How much of that is related to food? If this is one time and this is what we see, because most people don't notice it because it's just the normal. They just eat a certain way and that just
Right.
affects them. And it's kind of just the way that they are. And there's no way to pinpoint that it's from the food because your body's just used to it. But watching it in my own kids, it's like, wow, it's
So
unbelievable.
yeah, well, I couldn't even imagine, especially because you're going to be much more hyper vigilant around your children. You're with them every day. You know what they're like when they change and when their quote unquote normal is, right? So I guess how would a parent be able to decipher whether or not they're feeding their child? And I know this will vary for age, but overall, if there is a way to answer this, how would a parent be able to decipher that my child is acting different from the food that they're eating and what would be considered healthy?
So I would think
I
the
know
only
it's a big question.
Yeah,
Sorry.
but I get what you're saying, but I think that the biggest way would be to make a change, right? I think if you do change their diet and then you notice differences, then that is a clear way to see that maybe the food is affecting it. But it is. I mean, you don't need to do that. I can tell you that it is. If you ask any integrative practitioner, the one thing that they could do that could make the biggest difference in health for basically everyone for everything, it's the diet. That doesn't mean that everybody needs to change up their diet, but the food that we eat is crappy, in general, in the best of
Yeah.
cases. And so the most that we could do is to get the freshest food that we can, to cook as much as we can, to know where our food is coming from, to read the labels on everything, and to try to purchase the best possible products that there are. And that's going to be different for everybody. That might mean you're buying a bag of chips for your kids. So you look at two different bags and you look at the
Mhm.
ingredients, you find the one with more ingredients that you actually know what they are and less sugar and less crap in there. And that doesn't mean you never have to have chips, right? It just means that you're being more conscious of every purchase and you're moving in a better direction. But if you're eating everything with processed food, sugar, pre-prepared, then they're getting all of those chemicals on a consistent basis and it is affecting them. Now, does that mean that it's affecting them severely? No, but it for sure is. It has to. There's no way that it wouldn't. And that's just something to be mindful of. So I think kind of being mindful of that, being mindful of our purchases, that's really the first step. And it doesn't have to be overwhelming. You don't have to throw out everything that you have and start over again. You just start to be more mindful, start to read labels. Don't buy things with words you don't even know what they are. If it's a
Yeah.
long chemical name, then it's probably not good for you. And then you just start learning over time. You don't need a PhD in labels to buy better products.
Yeah, Google works.
Mhm.
It's easy to write benefits, like the benefits of a food, or I'll even say the side effects. Whenever people look things up, you can look up the side effects of any ingredient that looks confusing. And if you read the side effects, it can be like, whoa, that's kind of
Right.
mind-boggling.
Right. And that
Well,
that's be a step two, because first you need to think about it, right? The
right.
first step is like you have to read the label and you have to be conscious of those things. You don't need to Google anything because if you need to Google it, it's not good for you. Like that's almost almost for sure, right? Like it's pretty unlikely that the thing that
Yeah.
like, oh, I read avocado. I know what avocado is. Okay, it's probably not that bad for me, right? So that's the first step. But then hopefully as you become a little more conscious, then you do that. And that's super, then it opens your mind. You're like, really? Like I'm giving my kid that food dye and that's what's been studied and that's what we know about it. And basically, we know
Yeah.
nothing about this stuff, anyways. But we know that it's causing all these things. Like it. As soon as you read it, you're like, wow, okay, never mind. Like it's not
Yeah.
complicated most of the stuff. You're just like, why is that in food?
Well, I know it's also really hard to, even if you're eating a pretty clean diet, and especially I feel like the main, and I hate to say excuse, but it really is one. Because I used to nanny for families, and whenever they would be like, Savannah, I don't understand how you can get my kid to eat things. It must just be because you're the nanny and I'm the parent. And I was like, well, actually, no, I just don't cave in to them saying no. And I have them try the new things. But that's how I was able to get kids to try liver and heart, even, and things that may sound scary, but also the kids don't have to know. And you can put it into their food. And then when it's yummy, you can start associating those things too.
Mhm.
So I hate to say that it's an excuse, but I do know a lot of parents tend to cave in a lot to what their kids want and their kids need, what they think their kids need versus their kids' actual needs for healthcare.
Mhm.
And that's why I wanted to ask you, when it is difficult for a parent to be able to add in these nutritions, is this one of the reasons why you started the is it Tiny Apothecary,
Tiny
right?
Roots. Yeah.
Tiny Roots Apothecary, yeah,
I
to
mean,
give
yes,
them supplements.
yes and no. I mean, you can't. I don't think you can replace anything from food. Like food is the most important thing. We need to get them the nutrients through food.
Right.
Most kids, most adults are deficient these days, so supplements can be very helpful, I think, in general, just to boost things up. So I think it's important to have good, clean supplements available when you're sick. If you want to
Right.
boost your immune system when you're going to be around a bunch of other kids, if you are that picky eater, then getting some multivitamin or whatever can be very helpful. But I don't think it should be a crutch. I don't think you should do it instead of. I think it's just like an addition to, and then you're really focusing on the food. So yeah, I think it's important to have it, and it's something you can certainly do. But at the end of the day, the food is what actually matters. Because I don't think you can have all the best supplements in the world. They don't replace food, and I don't think you could even come close.
Yeah, no, it's true. And that's the thing. Most of them too, they have additives and you have to make sure that they're clean. And then companies buy out supplement companies or other food brands. So it's staying on top of that, which I know can feel exhausting to parents too. So is that also the milk company, Kiki Milk Company? Is that for breastfeeding moms as well?
No,
Or,
that it's like a plant-based milk. So it's
oh,
more for,
okay.
yeah, it's like a plant-based milk for toddlers and whoever else wants to drink it.
Yeah, which is great because I mean, so many of the plant-based milks out there have horrible additives
Hmm.
and crazy stuff in it. We tend to make ours whenever we do a plant-based milk. But I'd love to try it. Is it in like storefronts at
Yeah,
regular
it's in a couple of
places?
different stores, and you can definitely buy it online on like kikimilk.com.
Okay.
But yeah, it's really good. I mean, I've been involved with them since the beginning. I just got lucky. I got introduced to the owners, and they wanted somebody who had some medical wisdom, I guess, to kind of be on board
Background.
and ask questions to. But it's been really nice to go through the back end of food and then kind of see what's involved and why things are so difficult and why things are so crappy, because it's much easier to make a crappy food than it is to make a good one. And then even if you're going to make a good one, it's only so good that you can make it, because there are certain things that have to be in there, certain rules that have to be met, certain packaging that you have to have. And so it's just really interesting to see. But yeah, it's been great to be involved in a company where I know all the ingredients in there, and it's like, this is what's put in, this is what's not there. And that's kind of cool to see. Um,
Do you feel like being on the back end of food, you've seen more of an attack specifically on children when it comes to healthcare and having basically crappy food and stores versus adults or anything like that in general?
I think it's on everybody. I mean, I think that maybe the one difference for kids to some degree is there's a lot more marketing in terms of putting on characters and trying to distract you or the parent from looking at the label, maybe, and like having a kid want to buy a product because of who's on the label. Like, oh, you have like Bluey on the cover, or some Flintstones or whatever, and it's like, oh, I want the Flintstone cereal because that's the Flintstones, right? Or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
I think that's a part of marketing for kids, is just using something to distract you from what's actually in there.
I love that. I love all of your answers so much. This is my last question for you today, and this is the one thing I had 10 people ask this when I opened up. You saw yesterday on my Instagram, I was like, if anyone wants me to ask anything, this was asked the most, and it can be a hot topic. So if you want to pass, you can also pass it too. But the number one thing that people wanted to know is whether or not you feel comfortable working with families who are doing hormone blockers, or if you agree with hormone blockers for children. I know it is kind of crazy, especially for social media.
Yeah.
But if you'd like to put in your input on that, I'd love to hear it.
So, for me, I think Well, I don't know. I thought you were going to ask about vaccines. So that's what I thought you were about to ask about. Because that's usually the
It's all those same hot topics. Like
yeah.
that
But
was the second thing asked
yeah,
about though.
probably. I'm surprised. It's usually first, but okay. We maybe in a new world. There's other hot topics out there. I don't know.
I think it's because I'm a Christian based person,
Maybe.
so it tends to be that. And then, yeah,
Yeah.
vaccinations.
Yeah,
But
but for me, everything is kind of the same for me in terms of I think people should be able to do what they want to do. We shouldn't be replacing our own opinions with their opinions, and we should be informing people of the risks and the benefits for anything, whether it's shots, hormone blockers, whatever it is, and then people can make
yeah,
their own decisions based upon that. I think when we're talking about that, so I don't personally do that because that's more of like an endocrinologist the
yeah,
thing that they're going to be doing is not really
working with hormones.
yeah, exactly. So we don't really do that. I work with kids that have, been on different medications and hormones and other things like that before, but it's not overly common.
Mhm.
But I just think that it's very unfortunate that for almost every medication, the risks are really not known and the risks are really not discussed appropriately. And I think that's the biggest issue for so many things. You're having companies do the research and then they're giving you the data based on what they are finding, which of course they can kind of shape that data how they want, and they can shape studies in a way that is beneficial for them. And
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily trust a company to give you the best information. And obviously, they're going to maximize the benefits and minimize the risks. And a lot of things with risks can be many, many years later. And it's really hard to study those kinds of things. And most of the time, they don't study things long term. So I think that the most important thing is to realize that we just don't know a lot
Yeah.
about the long-term risks about many of these things. And so for some kids, medications might be the right option for different things for whatever that medication is. And for other kids, it's not going to be the right decision. But to do anything without really a lot of thought, I think is not the best way to go. And certainly when it comes to most medications for kids these days, we do them way too often, way too early, way too much when there are many other options available. And that is true for like ADHD medicines, for also asthma medication, all sorts of things. Like there are times when you need it. There are times when you need a medication that can save your life. And there are other times where people do things, just because like an antibiotic, it's like, oh, my ear hurts, let's do an antibiotic, when really it's just a virus. And so I think that kind of runs over all of these things, whether you're talking about hormone
Absolutely.
blockers, antibiotics, steroids, whatever it is, that you use things when you absolutely need to as a last resort. And sometimes they can save your life, and that's fine. And that's why pharmaceuticals are not all bad, right? Like pharmaceutical
Yeah.
companies are not all bad. It's just that they have a profit-driven motive, not a health-driven motive, and we just have to remember that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's why, I mean, circling back to what we even started with, that's why the parents have to be the ultimate healthcare advocates for themselves and for their family. Do the research beforehand, and understand all around benefits. That's why, I mean, even here, I'm a holistic health practitioner and I'm Christian based, but it's also understanding that's why I make it clear in the opening that it's God's singular truth under individualized discernment. You have to make individual discernment for what's best for you, what's best for your family, and of course, being a Christian, where God's leading you, right? So at the end of the day, I wish everyone could be like you. You're amazing, Dr. Gator. It's so fun talking to you and knowing and encouraging also my listeners who tend to have more of a negative aspect towards doctors, helping them understand and hear that on allopathic medicine and holistic medicine, there can be crooks and people who are financially based and driven, like you were saying, but it's about taking the time to weed through that and find the diamonds in the rough, like you, which you make it easy to find because you're on Instagram, which I'm going to also put in all of the show notes, your book, a link to your book, your Instagram, all of your information. I'm not sure if you're just crazy booked or if people can reach out to you and book with you if you're available, but I'll put also that information and how to contact you. And I can't even tell you how much of a blessing this was. I've been literally bragging to people that I got to speak to you today and telling them how excited I am because of how wonderfully well rounded you are and just well spoken and such a great healthcare advocate, in my opinion, for children and for adults. So thank you for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And Yeah, so in terms of some of the stuff that you said, so you can come to the office. I don't usually take on too many patients anymore. Some of the other doctors do, but certainly
Mhm.
people can reach out to me. There are many ways. I do stuff on. I try to do as much free stuff as I can for people. So like on my Instagram, I do every Sunday question and answers, so people can ask questions if they want to. One of the big things that people have asked, so I started this a couple months ago, was having more of a community, so people can ask questions and have discussions. So do have a VIP community on there with a small fee per month, but you can get on for the first month for free if you want. So
Awesome.
if anybody does want the book, you can go to the website. So you can get it everywhere, Amazon, wherever you can get it, but you can also go to parentingatyourchildspace.com, which is the name of the book. So parentingatyourchildspace.com. And then on there, if you email me after you purchase it, then I'll send you the first chapter. I'll send you a bonus chapter. I'll send you a free month for the VIP section. So all those things are there. So I'll just send that to anyone if they do pre-order.
Oh
So
my
that way
gosh.
get in with the community and ask more questions if they have them, but they don't have an integrative doctor.
Oh my gosh, thank you. And he's giving on top of all of this. Of course, I'm not surprised. But thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be on my podcast today. And I, you're just a huge blessing. And I can't wait to air this too. You did amazing.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for listening to our first ever video of Casting Seeds recording for our podcast. Don't forget to like, follow, share, add your commentary. We'd love to hear your feedback. And as always, keep casting seeds.